welcome. My name is Janet. I'm the Assistant Executive Director at FISA, and we have been running Zooms for the AMS group, which is the Associate Member Society, since the beginning of the suspension of in-class instruction. We've done lots of different topics, and today we have an extra special one with Dr. Ashley Miller. Dr. Miller is a child psychiatrist. Please forgive me, I don't have your bio pulled up, but I believe that you work with both Children's Hospital here in BC, but also you're connected with UBC, and I'm sure there's many other institutions and organizations that you're part of. In a moment, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Miller to do a webinar with us. We have a couple of requests. One is, if you are not already muted, please do mute yourself. In a couple moments, if you have not muted, we will be muting you. Dr. Miller will have time for questions and answers after her presentation, but while she's speaking, if there's something that you'd like to bring to everybody's attention, please use the chat function, which is down for most people at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little speech bubble that says chat. When you type in there and push enter, then we can follow along with what you want to share with the group without interrupting Dr. Miller's presentation. This will be recorded in just a moment, or I think it's already recording, and we will put it on the FISA website in a couple of days. If you need to leave early because other things call, you're more than welcome to drop in and drop out. We will be watching the waiting room and letting people in throughout the presentation. I'm just going to do a call out to see if any of the other AMS directors are on the line, and that would be Kent or Gabe. Rabbi Don, I saw you come in. Phil, Diana, is there anything that one of the directors would like to share with the group?
I mean, I just would like to welcome everyone. I think this is really important, and hopefully, you know, we're all getting geared up for June 1, and I'm sure that this seminar that we're going to go through, this little talk, is going to help us all with a lot of things that we can share with our staff. So welcome everyone, and looking forward to hearing the rest of this chat this afternoon.
Excellent. So then we're going to turn it over to Dr. Miller. I do want to do a shout out though to the Ministry of Education. Dr. Miller is joining us through funds. That was a grant obtained from the Ministry of Education to support mental health initiatives in schools. And we are thrilled that she's here at this time with this audience, which is right now at 213 people, to share some advice and some ideas with us all. So with that, we're going to turn it to Dr. Miller. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And is my volume okay? Just to check.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it seems great.
Great. Okay. Well, I really want to start by thanking you all for taking time to be here with us, with me. It's an unbelievable time for all of us trying to figure out, what do we do next? How do we help all the kids and the families that we work with? And I know we all have our own families, our own balancing act that we're doing right now. And it's really, I'm sure, a testament to how much you care about the kids and teens and families that you work with, that you're taking your time to come and learn more and discuss more about mental health. So thank you for doing that. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get started. I want to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got into this work as a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And I do work at BC Children's Hospital, and I've worked in community mental health as well for many years, working directly, going to visit schools. But the reason I think I probably got into this is that my mom was a high school math teacher for 40 years. And I saw how much she cared about her students' learning, and also where the points of frustration were when kids were struggling with their behavioral issues, when kids weren't turning in the work, when she'd call home to talk to a parent and there was a bit of finger pointing about why she wasn't doing more to help their child succeed. And so hearing her struggles and seeing her passion, I really felt like something I could bring was to work directly with families and to work closely with educators, because we're really all in this together. And by the time I'm seeing a kid and family in my office, chances are you as educators, teachers, administrators have already done a lot of the heavy lifting and continue to do it long after the kids aren't in my office anymore. So I really see us all as a huge team. And I'm really looking forward to your questions and comments as at the end of this. I want to start by talking about some of the common presentations that we see in youth and how they might show up in the virtual classroom or in what's happening right now. And there's a lot that's going to be similar, but there's a lot that's different now too, given everything that's going on. I want to review some really practical emotion-focused strategies to help kids get back to learning and to help their parents and guardians through this really difficult time. And also talk about how we can all support each other as educators. So I know that, you know, I don't ever consider my job to be anywhere near as difficult as my mom's was, because I'm not in front of a classroom all the time, but I do teach psychiatry, medical students and residents. And so some of the issues that come up with education also come up in my day-to-day work as well. So let's start with this big word, uncertainty. And that's essentially, you know, on top of all the regular challenges, that's what we're facing now, is what's it going to look like when kids and teens are partly back in the classroom? We've already been working maybe double, triple. What's it going to be like to teach virtually and in real life at the same time? How are we going to protect ourselves? How are we going to protect our families? So as educators, there's lots of concerns that we're all facing, and we just don't know exactly what's going to happen. Our students, of course, are wondering, how's it going to be to see their friends again? How's it going to be? Will they be allowed to be in close proximity with their friends? Those who are more anxious may be thinking, well, adults can't possibly police us to that extent. We aren't going to be able to follow the rules. Are we going to be healthy? All different kinds of concerns. And the parents, of course, are worried about their kids' safety. And even though there are very few cases of serious COVID complications for children and youth, they're not zero. And so, of course, parents are worrying about safety. So how do we navigate this all together? Well, that adds just sort of another layer to the typical types of challenges that we've seen with mental health in the classroom and now in the virtual classroom. So I'm going to go through some of the most common child and adolescent mental health issues and what they kind of look like in the various contexts. To do this, let's start with, these are just some made up cases, but I'm sure will seem familiar to some of the kids and teens that you've worked with. So if we talk about Sam, an 8-year-old who lives with his mother and older brothers, of course he likes video games, and he can be disruptive in class, sometimes, you know, making noises and actually bolting out of the classroom. And of course, unfortunately, when you try to talk to his mother about his behavior, she can become defensive and just say, well, there must be something that you're not doing right in your class. Otherwise, this would be going better. So that's one example. Lana, a 15-year-old whose parents are separated, she goes back and forth, and she was doing okay until recently when she injured her knee and then lost her passion, which is dancing. And ever since then, she's just not attending class regularly, seems to be really kind of grumpy, and her parents just don't know what to do. And this, let's say this was happening before COVID-19, and this is the kind of kid who was already not coming. And so now you might be wondering, how are we going to get her back in the classroom after all of this? So you may have your own, I'm sure you do have many youth that you've worked with. It helps as we go through this workshop to think a little bit about one of those kids, maybe one of the ones that you're finding the most challenging, or you can think about Sam or Lana as we go through. So when we think about really all humans, what we see in terms of their behavior, so whether it's Sam bolting out of the classroom, Lana giving attitude to her teachers or vice principal, what we're seeing, that's the tip of the iceberg. And as humans, there are so many layers underneath that behavior. And so one of the questions that I always ask when a kid is behaving in a way, or a teen is behaving in a way, or even a parent that doesn't make sense to me, or that's against what seems to be needed in the situation, I always ask, what is going on with this person that they're behaving in this way? And underneath the surface, what we have are all the feelings or emotions, which we don't often talk about in work settings, in educational settings. And then within that, there's the emotions that we show, which may be anger, might be yelling, might be, you know, putting a head down on a desk. And then there's the feelings that we don't talk about, the vulnerable ones, like fear, like sadness, like shame. So we have those, our thoughts, our beliefs. In this situation, there's all kinds of worries, our perceptions, and our needs. And fundamentally, we all have needs, and these are healthy things. And in this time, one of our basic needs is for safety. Another really important need that we always have is for belonging and for mattering. And those are needs that organizations are looking at. How do we help our employees feel like they matter and they belong? Because that kind of meeting that kind of need is actually what helps teams rise up to meet the challenges of all the uncertainty that we're facing. So that's what's under the iceberg. And so we're going to think about this. We're going to think about how do mental health problems actually develop? Because one of the things that can happen is when we're observing a mental health problem, and certainly when parents are aware that their child is struggling with something, one of the first things that parents do is blame themselves. They run through their list of everything they've done or not done and start wondering, well, was it this that caused it? Was it that? And sometimes as educators or clinicians and physicians, we may do the same thing. And what can develop is sort of a sense of shame. So we want to teach families right off the bat that mental health problems are complex and they are not caused by one thing that was done or not done, or even a series of things that were done or not done by a parent. It's a complex interlay of genes, biology, social cultural factors, stress, illnesses, or substance use, medical issues. And of course, the relationships do contribute or can contribute, but the way they contribute is primarily through what we call emotion avoidance. So it's not what happens, it's what happens next. It's not because of a divorce that a child develops depression. It's not even because of the death of a parent that a child develops an anxiety disorder. If bad things happen all the time, and most people, including teens, are extremely resilient, what happens after is the caring response from our environment. So if we have a tragedy, if we have a terrible event, but the people in our environment are able to help us meet our needs for connection, are able to help us with our own self-soothing, are able to give us a way of working through it. And if we can feel the emotions as they happen, then there is no reason to believe that we're going to develop complicated grief, depression, PTSD. So right now, as we're going through COVID-19, you know, I hear a lot of people really concerned that this is definitely going to damage youth. Now, it's not great to be socially isolated. It's not great to live through a pandemic. But what the real danger would be if we don't have a space that kids and teens can talk about their feelings or feel their feelings. So if we expect everyone to just kind of march through like nothing is going on without space for them to feel anxious, to feel sad, to cry sometimes if they need to, that would be the greater danger. So it's not the events that cause mental health problems. It's a lack of supportive response in the environment and combined with all of these different factors. So we're in a great position. You guys are in a fantastic position as educators, as frontline on the mental health field to really provide kids with what we call like psychological PPE. And we're going to get into that more. How do you help kids be with their difficult emotions, which is actually protecting them and building their resilience to mental health issues down the road? So you might have heard, you know, a lot of talk about, even before all of this, that there's an epidemic of depression, there's an epidemic of anxiety. And it's true that there have been more diagnoses of depression, anxiety, especially in teens in the last number of years. And we think a lot of this has to do with having nonstop sort of social media influence and constant judgment and the sense that they can't escape from anything all the time. Also an absence of free play, which used to be like a really basic and important part of childhood. one of the things that we're seeing now is that in research coming out of China is there is more, looks like anxiety, depression in kids after social isolation. And we can learn from that. We may not be able to open up the gates. It's not safe to do so for nonstop social isolation, but socializing, but we can certainly guide teens and kids into how to connect with others. And we as educators and you can be there as part of the circle of support for kids so that they are experiencing less adverse effects. So I just want to go through quickly some of the main signs in the major common mental health disorders, just so that we're all kind of working with the same language. Depression is fairly rare before puberty, but becomes quite common. Up to 1 in 5 teenagers will have a major depression. And depression can look different in teenagers from adults. So often they're grouchy or irritable, not necessarily sad. And you would often notice depression in a student by somebody who is irritable or who is not handing things in or who's missing first block. In this context, somebody who's not waking up and making it for their earlier morning lessons or check-ins online. And it can look like a lot of things, but especially in teen boys, you may see negative behavior, acting out behavior, and the same is true of younger kids too. So whenever I see a kid who's acting out, that's one of the things that goes through my mind, is to wonder about depression, especially if they've had a recent loss or a recent major transition, like parents separating, best friend moving away. And social isolation through physical distancing, this is definitely a risk for depression in vulnerable kids, because depression grows out of a lack of connection. And so that is definitely a risk, and one of the reasons that we want to see kids having at least one other friend as soon as it's safe to do so, that they can spend time with. Anxiety and OCD, of course, are going to be really major concerns coming out of this pandemic. A lot of the kids with anxiety and OCD were actually calmer when the lockdown type of stuff went into place, because now the rest of the world was finally understanding what it was like to be them, to have to be in this hypervigilant state all the time. And so a lot of the kids that I've seen have actually been coping pretty well during this time. But now as things start to open up, this is where we can start to see greater difficulty. So refusing to go places is often related to anxiety, you know, the kids who really dig in their heels, and rages. So a lot of our angry kids and kids who are raging at their families or at teachers are kids who are struggling with anxiety or OCD. Because when you're anxious, the natural human instinct is to try to control the situation. And when you can't, and you're a kid, you don't have power. So when you can't control the situation, then the natural response is to become angry. So we see that a lot. And it may be, you may be seeing it a lot in some of these behaviors. So these safety behaviors are what kids do to try to control anxiety. And in fact, what we all do. And what you'll see often in an educational context is procrastination and avoidance. So this can look like, you know, quote unquote laziness. It can look like, oh, they just don't care. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's both this idea that it's not going to be good enough. So the perfectionism can come in with anxiety, or it could be, I don't know exactly what my teacher wants of me. So that would be an uncertainty. And when anxious kids don't know what's expected of them or what to do, they often freeze and they do nothing. And so it looks like procrastination. And sometimes it's a bit of the perfectionism, a bit of the fear of uncertainty, and sometimes there's disorganization added in the mix too. So a lot of things not getting done is related to that. And then of course, another way we all manage anxiety is distraction. So the kids who are kind of on screen all the time, again, because it's hard for them to sit with that feeling of discomfort. And we all do that. So it might look like that. ADHD, these are some of the kids who are really struggling right now with the virtual learning, because at the best of times, organizing themselves into having a routine or structure or getting their work done has been difficult. And they really thrive with routine and with clear limits, and often with a lot of extra adult support. So these kids are often now having a hard time. And again, that may look like laziness, it may look like not caring, but it is often just like that executive function part of the brain isn't developed yet. That ability to organize, sequence, and plan just isn't fully online. So these guys really benefit from having a very clear structure of what to do. In kids with autism or more serious developmental issues, unfortunately, with the pandemic, lost a lot of their services. So the kids who have more serious, issues, who needed in-home support or other kinds of support. So these families are really tired right now, and are been so grateful for the schools who have continued to provide services during the pandemic, because that's been a huge, huge help to these families. Again, change in routine is very difficult. So as I'm thinking about going back to school and things like having, a day one, a day two that are completely different, I think some of our youth with high functioning autism might really struggle with having a different routine on different days, and having something that's clear and consistent, is probably going to be most helpful for them. So I can see the difficulty as educators of how do you sort of meet the needs of these disparate groups of people. And I just want to say a couple words about kids who have a history of PTSD and trauma, because I know you're also very much front lines for kids who are coming to school or online, and we don't know what's behind there. But when we see the reactivity, so if we think of the case I presented of Sam, the 8-year-old boy who's bolting out of the classroom. Now there's lots of reasons for that. It may be something fairly minor, but usually when a kid fully bolts, there's some aspect of a fight or flight response in that, and that's kind of the flight. So the bolting can be a sign that they were triggered by something that just hits them at a different level because of having gone through something traumatic before. Kids with autism spectrum who often have sensitivities to noises, sounds, touch, maybe there's some kind of sensory issue. So there's always something under the tip of the iceberg. And unfortunately, in this context, one of the risks of social isolation, of course, is that kids and families have been in close quarters, and there's been lots of tension for some of the families. So there may be some kids returning to school who unfortunately have experienced abuse, or at least difficult, very difficult family environments. We still, as always, if we are concerned, we do need to talk to the Ministry of Children and Family Development. But in terms of figuring out what's going on for a kid, we may not be able to get to the bottom of it, but just noticing that even living at home with parents who've been arguing, constantly, kids' nervous systems are going to be on edge, that subset of kids. And we can't assume it's only those who come from more socioeconomically disadvantaged environments. There's certainly a lot, kids in all kinds of families who may be coming back, or who may still be experiencing just the added stress of heightened levels of family tension. So that's what those are some of the common things that might be under the tip of the iceberg. But what's it going to look like for you? Well, you're probably sort of seeing them already. Some kids maybe, even the kids, younger kids, it's normal for them for sure to goof off in a virtual environment a little bit, to get distracted. But the kids who really kind of drop off the radar, those are the ones that I'm most concerned about. And then there may be ones who just refuse to do anything when asked. I always see refusals as a sign that there's something else going on. Other students may be concerned and bring them to your attention, but right now we don't necessarily have that. And of course, you can also look at your own reaction as an educator. So if you notice that you're feeling particularly frustrated with a student, or if you notice that you're feeling particularly helpless about a student, that is a good indicator that there may be something going on with that student's mental health. So to trust that, to talk to a colleague about it, to try to sort out what may be a way to reach that student. And I think this, I'm sure is very standard for everyone, but as you're talking to your staff, it's important for them to know that students are always afraid of being shamed. And what may seem like a very, very helpful comment or question that's made out of concern, if it's in a public setting, students will often talk about the shame they feel, and they can be quite sensitive to this. So we want to take them aside and just non-judgmentally say what we've noticed. So use the behavioral features without the guess as to what might be going on, and focusing on the positives as well. And when it almost matters less what you say, but when you're really coming at it from this perspective of concern, and then kids do tend to respond well, and they really appreciate that you're there in their corner. So I just want to go through, before moving into more specifics, some of the things mentioned on the Anxiety Canada website and through their webinars that I found extremely helpful for all of us coping through this pandemic. And I think these are good tips for anxious kids, but also really for all kids. And I've just put it to Dr. Bonnie Henry's catchphrase, because I think it covers it all. So for the first round of being safe, anxious people we all need information, so that's not a problem. And talking to kids about making sure they're getting their information from reliable sources, and for all of us to kind of stick to a few reliable sources, and then just cutting out extra reading, extra information beyond what we need to know that day, or beyond what we need to know to be kind of a helpful citizen. And once there is a plan, to really stay with that, to follow the plan that the BC government has outlined, because a lot of changes breeds uncertainty and also makes us feel less stable. And kids and teens want to know what they can do to be helpful. I mean, they've just been amazing, drawing their pictures of rainbows and cheering for healthcare workers, and little kids practicing hand washing and singing songs, and they can do all of that. And older teens and youth, they can practice physical distancing, they can make their own masks. The more they're involved in the plans of what's going to keep everybody as safe as possible, the more engagement they have. In terms of coping with uncertainty, our own stress management is going to be vital, because we really are, like the thermometers that manage the temperature, the emotional climate in the space where we teach and work. So knowing that there is no right decision, because I think as we're opening up, a lot of the anxiety comes from, well, can we do this? Can we be in this group? And knowing that beyond following the guidelines, there's no one exact right, because anxious kids will think they need to do what their peer group is doing, and trusting themselves and their own decision-making process is actually going to help. And we can teach them to take a space just to breathe, to take some time before making a decision, because when the nervous system is all riled up, it's really hard to think. And one of the very quick meditation techniques I'll teach parents is something called a stop meditation. So the S is just for stop. So whatever's happening, stop what you're doing. T is for take 3 deep breaths. And then O is observe how you're feeling. And P is proceed. And this is something I talk to parents about also, because when they're stuck at home with kids feeling like they have no break, that very small breathing space can help them to feel calmer so they can go on to doing what they need to do with their kids. We need to help the anxious students and parents too, to look at the overall picture, to keep the current risk in perspective, and to start looking at the risk-benefit ratio for their family of sending kids to school versus staying home, or having kids have some socialization with one friend versus not. It's not going to be possible to stay in this total lockdown state going forward as things are opening up. And I also talk with teens about starting the day with some kind of self-care, and for ourselves as well. And finally, around being kind, helping others is actually one of the best antidotes to anxiety. So we all notice, like when we have our own problem, it's hard to figure it out. But if you try to help someone else with the exact same problem, it can be way easier. And that's because when we're focused on someone else and helping someone else, that gets us out of our own mind and our own fears. So the idea of having a pandemic buddy, a coping colleague, somebody who you can check in with as you're going to work, how things are going, and just be able to talk about things more personally. Teaching kids to notice the helpers and really creating an environment of being a team, even as we're virtual. And with families, I'm giving them a lot of permission to take space, right? Because everybody is sort of stuck together. If that means going for a walk, listening to what you need, stopping an argument in the middle and saying, I just need a few minutes for myself, and teaching kids to do the same. So there may not be a lot of physical space, but there can always be emotional space. So now I want to go more into some of the specific things that you can say to help students when they're going through difficult times. And this comes out of emotion-focused school support, developed by Dr. Adela France. And she developed this noticing that, you know, teachers and educators would say that behavioral systems in the classroom don't always work, and they needed a quick and powerful way to support student engagement and learning that didn't require intensive training. And the purpose of this, you know, it's not going to solve the whole problem. Giving emotional support doesn't solve the whole problem. But when we're stressed, when our fight or flight response is going, then we're not able to learn. And so that's the thing, is kids have to be regulated enough to be able to learn. And at either extreme, so, you know, some kids shut down, they put their head on their desk, they may fully fall asleep, they may act like they're falling asleep, they may just kind of go silent and not talk. That can be a sign of the fight-flight response, but it's called freeze. It's a fight, flight, or freeze response. It's like an animal in the wild who is stressed may actually just shut down and play dead. So that's part of this human stress response. Most of us are familiar with the red zone up here, which is the can't calm down, the angry, the nonstop talking, the agitated. And we want to help kids be in this green zone, which is called the window of tolerance. And the thing right now with the pandemic is people may be coming into your classrooms or online sessions already in the red zone because of family stress, because of personal safety stress. So we don't know. A lot of kids are fine, actually. A lot of kids right now are spending excellent quality time with their family, are even more settled than before because they're not rushing around to a million activities. So some of your kids may be totally in this green zone and okay. Others, especially the anxious ones, might be in the red or the blue right from the word go. So we talk a lot about self-regulation, but what I'm going to be talking about in the rest of this is really about co-regulation, that as caring adults, we can help students with their overall emotional well-being, and we all co-regulate as people. So this is one of the reasons that helping someone else actually helps us calm down, but it's not even just the helping, it's also just the being with someone else. A natural part of helping to feel more brave and more calm. So if you take a moment and just think of a favorite teacher, coach, mentor, relative that you had as a child and adult, and just sort of think about what were some of the qualities of that person. You know, what was it really that you loved or respected about them? And just sort of picture that in your mind's eye. And most people will say it's something about their presence, something about their patience, their unconditional support. You know, it's rarely about their brilliance. It's rarely about, you know, how many gifts they bought them. And the good news about this, that really what we're looking for is just presence and unconditional support, is that all of us have the capacity to be there in this deeply present way for the students and families that we work with. There's nothing magical to it, and it doesn't require any kind of intensive training. And this lovely dock and boat, you know, you think about the relationship between a student and a teacher as the same in a way as a relationship between a child and a parent, in the sense that you can be, and often are, a very important attachment figure for that child. And for teens, although it may not be nearly as intense, you are still a place of stability, a safe harbor that they can come back to, especially right now. And especially for this academic year, as you knew these students before this all happened. So if you're interested, this is from the Circle of Security, and this, as you can see, is about much younger kids, but this really applies throughout the lifespan, that the hands on the side of the circle here represent the caring adult, and the child going out to explore the world and then coming back to a safe haven. This is just a very helpful graphic about what kids need, right? If we go to what are those needs at the very bottom under the iceberg. And when they are acting out, it is usually because one of these needs, either the need for exploration and being supported, or the need for safety and comfort, is not being met. And it's hard to be the hands on this circle. It's hard to be that stable doc, especially right now when as adults, we all have lots going on for ourselves. But that still can be and is a role for us. And that's at the base of really helping all kids, but especially kids with mental health issues. So we're going to go now into the sort of like operationalizing, how do we be that doc? How do we be those hands on the circle? And how do we do that verbally and in a quick way? So to start with this, and normally we do this as a question answer in this kind of workshop, but normally, you know, when a kid says, I'm terrible at math, I feel so stupid, you just think for a second, how would you sort of respond without thinking too hard about it? Kind of probably 90% of people will say, no, you're not. Like, or don't say that, you're great at math. That's just the normal instinctual way we've been conditioned to respond to a kid's distress. And what about this? If a kid says, I'm worried, it's okay, it's gonna be okay. Or, well, it's not that big a deal. Or I can't do this. Of course you can, would be typical. I mean, I did this just today. My daughter said, you ate my pizza. And I said, well, just eat mine, it's just as good, which is essentially the same thing. And really, the pizza is not just as good. I don't want to do this. Well, you got to do it. I mean, so these are the ways that we respond. These are the typical ways that we respond. And typical responses usually include reassuring, maybe downplaying it a little bit, trying to solve the problem. Mom, or you know, if they're talking to a teacher, so-and-so wouldn't play with me at recess. Maybe that's not going to be an issue anymore, but still you'd say, well, like maybe, did you try talking to them? Why don't we go talk to them together? We often jump straight to problem solving because we're trying to help, or cheerleading, talking about what they should be feeling. And why do we do this? Well, fundamentally, it's because we want to make it better. And we feel upset when the kids and teens we're trying to work with are upset. And sometimes we don't understand or agree with what they're saying. So if a kid says, you know, Miss Smith, this homework is stupid, and you're Miss Smith, you're not going to be very happy about that. And it's not very easy to agree with that. You certainly don't want to agree with that. And we don't want to make it worse, because there is a perception that if a kid is upset and we go into that feeling, that they may never get out of it and it may just get worse. So, and it also can take too much time. And right now, if you're running an online class and you're on Zoom or whatever platform and you have, you know, 30 students, I mean, it's actually very practically difficult to talk about anything emotional. So we're going to have to envision, how does this happen? Does this happen in one-on-one checks? Can this happen via private chat on whatever platform you're using? How is this going to happen so that it is private enough, but also that we're not missing opportunities to connect with kids? And again, this is the idea of this, is to get kids into that green zone in the middle, that the door to reason is on the ground floor if emotion is like an elevator. So what we're talking about is using these strategies to help kids get there. And we're going to need it more when there's chronic stress. For this, there's certain kinds of kids that their amygdala is always rapid firing. And there's actually physiological differences in the brain of some kids, and we can call them a super feeler. Lots of our kids with mental health issues fit into this category. So, you know, one kid may not need this, but another kid does. And this is kind of what your job often looks like as an educator, is you're trying to put out the fire in this kid's brain through helping them be with their emotions. So the basic concept is called emotion coaching. And the first step is to validate the kid, what they're saying, to prove that it makes sense from their perspective. This is not agreeing. It's saying, yes, I can see why from your point of view it would look like this. And then you get into support. Now, I would say probably 95% of the time, we are all offering support. The difference in this approach is really entering into that first step first. And validation is not, it's not saying that they did a great job. It's not cheerleading. It is really about, just saying that it makes sense to you why they're doing what they're doing. So let's imagine this example. If you have a student say, you know, I don't want to give that presentation in front of the class, or maybe in this context, I don't want to post my answers on the team site. I don't want everyone else to see it. So you might start to validate and say, well, I can imagine why you wouldn't want to present. And now what do you think is likely to come out of my mouth? Most of the time, the next thing would be but, right? I can see why, I can imagine why you want to present, but you got to do it anyway, or but it won't be so bad. That's, again, totally typical conditioned response that most of us have. So what we want to do, and this is really the key take-home message, is to move from but to because. So instead of saying, I can understand why you might not want to present to the class, but instead we want to say, I can understand that you might not want to post on the website because it can feel a little embarrassing, because this is all new, and because you're not confident that the thing you did is exactly what was expected. So I can understand that. And then you don't have to stop there, because, you know, that's a start. But usually after that, what we'll add is another part that is the reassurance, or that is the practical way of supporting them. But the first step is that validation. And you don't have to only validate what somebody is saying. You can validate emotions. So I don't blame you for being mad that I ate your pizza slice. You were really looking forward to that pizza. And we can validate an attitude. You know, I get why you wouldn't like the way, you know, Joey is treating you right now, because it's not really fun when somebody is leaving you out and then makes jokes about you. And you can validate the urge. So yeah, I can imagine that if somebody did that to me, I'd feel like punching them too. Now that one can feel a bit tricky, right? A bit dangerous, because we don't want to say, go ahead and punch this kid. Obviously not. But to validate the urge is not the same as to validate the action. And for behaviors like an action, of course, we're going to stop negative behaviors. So if a kid is doing something that is over the line, whether it be an aggressive behavior, aggressive language, it's absolutely fine. And you should always stop things that you need to stop. But you can provide validation as you're setting the limit or stopping the behavior, or you can do it afterwards. So you might break apart two kids who are fighting and then later say, you know, I don't blame you for feeling so angry that you wanted to trip Joey because he's been making fun of you nonstop. So after you've separated or stopped the behavior, you can still validate the emotion that was underneath. And I've given a lot of anger examples, but an example for fear or anxiety that might come up during these times might be like, yeah, I can, you know, I'm wondering if it's kind of like, doesn't make sense and you're feeling pretty scared of coming into school right now, because for the last 2 months, everyone was saying, don't go anywhere. And now we're saying you should go somewhere. And that must be really confusing. So no wonder you're feeling scared right now. That would be an example of a validation of fear or anxiety. So there's lots of different things that you can use. And if you're not kind of sure whether this would work or not, I just want to do a little bit, I'll attempt to do this little bit of an experiential exercise with you guys. If you want to, just for a moment, sort of look downwards or close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And I want you to just sort of feel kind of the resistance in your body to, let's say you don't want to go to work. You don't feel like going to work. Maybe it's Monday morning or you've had a long weekend, long day. You just don't want to go to work. And if I say to you, come on, you got to go. The kids are depending on you. If you don't get up, you're not going to be able to be there for them. And you're going to like, no, you got to get up right now. It's time to go. Okay, so just notice how that felt. And now say, I want you to start again. Same thing, you don't want to go. And I say, I don't blame you for not wanting to go to work. There's been triple the work in the last 3 weeks, not to mention the last 8 weeks. And it's hard to know how you're going to protect yourself. And it's hard to know how you're going to teach. So I don't blame you at all for not wanting to get up and go to work right now. So just notice the difference in your body. You can open your eyes and come back into the webinar, just noticing the difference in your body, how resistant you might have felt, how clenched or not you might feel. And it doesn't end there because, you know, obviously I don't have permission to let everyone stay home from work. I wish I did. But it's about coming on side, understanding the difficulty, and then being able to help the child or teen move forward. So after we've provided the validation, then we can absolutely move into the reassurance or expressing, you know, we're all in this together. So yeah, I can really imagine why you might not want to post your presentation online, because it can feel a little embarrassing and it's new and you haven't done before. And I really believe that you're going to be able to do it and get a good reaction from your peers. And I'm here with you. If you want to show it to me first, just to myself, that's totally fine. Or, you know, whatever comes next in terms of emotional support and practical support, so you may move into problem solving. I tried texting my friend. They didn't want to hang out with me. That's it, I give up. You know, and well, then I might say, yeah, it's hard to text your friend. You're not sure that they're going to reply and you haven't seen them in a few months. So do you want me to just kind of listen about this, or can I help you find some solutions? Do you want to work on it together? Can give some choice. You might be able to then go into problem solving. Should we brainstorm some ideas? So this is the kind of thing that we can do, you know, with the kids that we work with and the kids in our own lives. And what we're trying to convey is that I'm here, I hear you, not that I always agree with you. That's why we can validate things that we don't agree with. We're conveying that we understand, at least to a certain extent, because we may not understand all the time. We don't have to pretend. And kids who are more older kids and teens, or kids who are a bit more sensitive, may not like you to say, well, I understand why you'd feel. You might say, you know, I'm kind of wondering if you might feel this way. And it's not that I want the kid to be happy, and they may not be happy, right? There's a lot to not be happy about right now. It's just to show that I'm here, I'm trying to understand. And it's more of an attitude of I care, not jumping right away to I'll solve all the problems for you. So it's a stance, we can be tentative about it. And it's really that attitude of I'm with you, I'm on side. I think you're generally a great kid. Something isn't going well here. And trying to figure it out together. So I've circulated with the webinar invite. There's a couple of documents. One, they're both from the Mental Health Foundation's website, and one of them is sentence starters, so different ways to start. And you have to think of the kid that you're working with. These can be some ways to start a validating sentence. And again, some kids are particularly sensitive to you saying, I can understand. They may not like that. So you can even validate it if a kid says, you could never possibly understand what I'm going through. And maybe that's true. And you can say, you're right. I don't blame you for being annoyed that I said I could understand, because I could never possibly understand what you're going through. And it must be so frustrating that I act like I know what you're thinking all the time. So depending on the kid you're getting, you can always use validation to get through it. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip some of the practice, but the other scenario, the other handout that you have is for self-directed practice. And you can go through any of those kinds of stems and try to think, how would I personally validate any of these kinds of things? And so I put in here a couple of examples, like Lana saying, well, everyone's just overreacting. So you can imagine if you're asking kids to maintain physical distance, you might get a kid who says, everybody's overreacting. I don't see what the problem is. And there can be an answer to that too. I can see why you might feel that way, because there's only 2,000 some cases and BC is generally doing well, and you see lots of people hanging out together. So it must be pretty frustrating that you're not allowed to hang out close to your friends, and it just feels like everybody is totally overreacting. So you can validate that too. Now, the hardest things to validate, of course, are the ones that you don't personally agree with. So I would suggest you practice some of the easier ones first that are more in line with what you personally would feel, that are easier to empathize with, and then move on to practicing some of the more difficult ones. And what you'll see, and this is actually really interesting, especially between partners in a couple or colleagues, is that when you can validate someone's opinion that is opposite to yours, that can be kind of like magic. Because rather than getting polarized into these two camps where we keep fighting more and more and more, when we can validate the opposing opinion, it diffuses all the tension and we can have a more productive conversation. So I definitely encourage you to try that out. So I want to move in to using some of these strategies when we're working with parents or guardians, because I'm sure you're all hearing a lot from parents these days. And the reason I've subtitled this Recognizing Hidden Fears, this has been the title of this for a while, because underneath parents' anger, underneath parents' complaints is almost always fear. Parents have the fear of negative outcomes for their kids, but of course they also have the fear of being blamed for whatever is going wrong with their kid. And parents, especially these days, carry a lot of shame and a lot of fear of being judged. So almost all the negative behaviors and comments that you're going to see from parents really are from a place of fear. So again, we go through this kind of as an example. A parent approaches you or calls you and says, I'm really disappointed in your teaching methods. You're not helping my child at all. Or maybe you've heard something along the lines of, you guys were too slow to respond. This online schooling really isn't working for my kid. Or how are you going to, I'm sure there's hundreds of varieties of this kind of complaint. So first of all, of course, as a human being, we're all going to feel a reaction to this kind of complaint. And it would be impossible to not react and just be super zen and pretend it doesn't hurt us at all. So part of why we developed emotion-focused school support is the idea that, we needed to help educators to manage these kinds of difficult interactions with parents and guardians, because often that's the harder part of the job in dealing with the kids. So this is what I'd like to say I look like when I'm dealing with an angry parent, but it's more like this, because it really, we're all in this kind of job because we want to help others, because we work way harder than most people know. You guys work way harder than most people know in education. And, you don't do it for the complaints, and certainly not at a time like this. So the first thing is to notice that. And when I say that parents are complaining out of a place of fear, that's true. And all of these things, all of these roots underneath the tree, it's kind of like the iceberg metaphor. Underneath all the behaviors that we see parents do with kids that we sort of, aren't very happy about, like Sam's mom in my example, who's defensive, who won't really take any responsibility for why her son's bolting out of class, or maybe the parents of a really anxious kid who just don't help him to do his homework, aren't able to get him to school. There's lots and lots of these kinds of potential reactions that we don't like seeing, or sometimes we see a parent who's really critical of their kid, and underneath all of those negative behaviors and reactions are these emotions. So that's really what I wanted to talk about for the next little bit. So again, we want to use the same idea with the parents, that if a parent comes to you and says, your teaching methods aren't effective, that we can use the same idea of validation for the parent's concerns. So for example, I can understand why you would think my teaching methods aren't working because your child has not been able to complete their work and they're telling you that they're anxious, and you're paying a lot of money actually for this school. So no wonder you're concerned or upset that they don't seem to be learning right now. And so that's a hard thing to say. It takes a lot of vulnerability and courage on the part of the educator. But again, as opposed to sort of like arguing or trying to convince them logically, which isn't going to work because they're also they're not in that green zone. Their elevator is on floor 10. When we can use validation and because statements, then we can help them come down to the point where they might be able to take in even some emotional support, or at the very least some practical support from us. So again, that's something that you can practice either with your, on your own with pen and paper, maybe with a colleague, and you can practice responding as you would kind of role playing to a disgruntled parent or a parent who is behaving in some way that doesn't seem to be in the best interest of their child. And one of the things that helps with this is really knowing your own Achilles heel as an educator. So is it disrespect? Is it when a teacher says to you, how long have you been teaching anyway? That really gets some of us. Is it when a teacher, when a parent is disappointed or unhappy? Is it when you worry that an administrator is going to be dissatisfied and so you don't want to upset the parent because you don't want the parent to complain? Is it being pressed for time or personal health and safety? Once we know our own Achilles heel, we can practice those situations and recognize when we start to feel our own tension mounting that it's probably related to one of those things. And not only, now, but kind of at all times, recognizing just how hard it is to be an educator. I mean, dealing with all of the people in front of you all day, all the time. It's a lot of work. And now we're dealing with people through uncertainty and through their own uncertainty. So being able to be kind to yourselves to say like, wow, we really are doing so much and under such difficult circumstances that we're not going to always be perfectly calm or respond in these ways. And that's okay. Because the other thing that we want to teach our students, we want to teach parents, and that we can remember for ourselves is that you can always have a do-over. If you have lost your cool with a student, which happened, this week I got really frustrated with a family that I was working with, and I was not very happy with how I handled it at all. And you can always say, I'm sorry that I reacted that way, and it must have been really hard for you because you're coming to me for help. And then when I reacted that way, must have felt like who's in your corner. And what I should have said was, I don't blame you for, being so frustrated with your child because you're just trying to do the best you can to help him out and he's not listening. And that gets really frustrating as a parent. So a do-over is where you admit or acknowledge the small rupture there was in the relationship you have with the person, and then you go back and try again, but this time using validation instead of the reaction. And that's how relationships are built, is through that repair process. So again, remembering that for ourselves as educators, we also engage in these negative behaviors sometimes. We can be defensive, we can overly accommodate, that's just normal human behavior, but looking beneath the surface into what emotions may be driving those behaviors in us. And in teams, so as educators, You know, we're working most of the time in teams, and it can be kind of helpful to think of how are we default in times of stress. So these animal photos are metaphors for different reactions. And the rhino style of reacting would be, okay, we got to get it done, trying to push through the change. If it's about a kid who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, this would be the attitude that's more like we just got to put them on a contract, we got to get it going, and they're going to face the consequences of their own decisions. There's nothing wrong with that stance, and often it's very helpful, but in times of stress may push more or may try to get more outcome oriented. The kangaroo would be the example of, well, they're having a hard time, so let's go easy on them, let's give them a break, let's protect them, let's do whatever we can in our power to take out the roadblocks and make things easier. And again, under times of stress, we may be more inclined to protect and to not let kids sort of face what they have to face or do things independently because we just want to shield them from harm. And then the ostrich style would be more like, okay, when's my coffee break? And just, you know, not necessarily dealing with it. And the more stressful a situation is, the more we tend to get polarized and rigid around our positions. And so a kangaroo might start arguing more and more for protection, and the rhino may be pushing more and more for things to be independent, and the ostrich may avoid more and more and more, leading to difficulties. But if we can look in our teams, recognize ourselves, and notice that this is not a characteristic of each person, this is a way of behaving under stress, and that under these ways of behaving is generally a deep desire to care for the students and families that we're working with, and some kind of fear of something negative happening. And if we can talk about those fears, you know, the kangaroo is usually afraid of harm coming to the child. So in a COVID kind of example, the kangaroo may say, you know, everybody should stay home and on virtual because it's too risky to have them in person. And we just can't do that. We can't risk that for anyone. And the rhino may say, you know what, like this is the new normal. The sooner we get used to it, the better it's going to be. And we can continue to butt heads over it. But really recognizing that everyone is coming from a good place and talking about the fears and validating the other person's point of view. So if someone who tends to respond in more of a kangaroo kind of way can say to the more rhino type of person, you know, I can see that if we only stay virtual, it may be difficult for kids who are more anxious to be able to come back to school in September because they have now had less time to socialize with others. And, you know, at some point we're going to have to work together to figure this out. And the rhino knows that you are really not against them and you understand some of their point of view. Everything gets easier. So again, in teams, looking at the balance and knowing that everyone's going to have their own individual way of dealing with things. So over the coming months, being there for each other as colleagues, I think, is going to be an essential part of helping the students and families, and really being able to listen deeply to our colleagues' concerns, to start there. So if you're an administrator and a teacher comes in and says, you know, this parent is calling nonstop and I don't know what to do, and I just can't reach their kid, the first order of priority is really validation of the educator, the teacher's feelings. Like, wow, it looks like you are working so hard to get in touch with this parent to try to get this kid back to school. That must be so frustrating that you've been working, nothing's happening. So it can be tempting to move to problem solving, or even sometimes to point out what someone could be doing better. What we want to encourage is validating your colleagues' concerns first and helping them to feel comfortable then probably to solve their own problem, and to certainly feel like more of a team and to feel more heard and understood and supported with you. So, I mean, truly, and I think this is a mantra that we've seen over and over again in BC and around the world, is that when we stay together and connected as colleagues in communities, that's when we're at our strongest. And the kids will really respond to a sense of unity within the schools, amongst the administration and between administration and teachers. The sense that we are all helping each other, and we may not know all the answers, but man, we're going to figure this out together. I think that's what's going to help kids to feel comfortable gradually coming back in the school setting or online in any context. So if you're interested in some of these ideas, this is a book I wrote with Adele LaFrance. We go through lots of scenarios. This is intended for parents and caregivers, but a lot of the ideas are applicable to teachers and administrators as well, and certainly in your role if you have families or kids in your life. So I want to just end before we go into questions with some resources. And if you're not familiar with the Kelty Mental Health Resource Center, this is a fantastic resource for, there's a special section for educators, but information for parents, for youth on finding mental health resources. And they have what's called parents in residence who can provide parent peer support to parents of kids with mental health issues. And they have in all communities throughout, well, I shouldn't say all communities, but many communities throughout British Columbia, there are parents in residence. And there are also youth in residence who can provide peer support to youth with mental health issues. So excellent one-stop shop. AnxietyCanada.com has great resources on specifically on anxiety, and really as good as anywhere I've seen on any resource, including very practical things like coping plans that parents and kids can make, and just recommendations around the ways to think more helpfully around the pandemic. Foundry BC is more for the 12 to 24 population, and they're offering virtual drop-in counseling right now. They're aiming to be able to offer ongoing counseling, but right now it's drop-in, which is excellent, and great sections there about how to talk to someone about their mental health problem. And the resources at the bottom here, Mental Health Foundations and emotion-focused familytherapy.org, have more information, webinars. Some of them are freely available on the kinds of strategies that I was talking about today. So I definitely would encourage you to take a look at those. And there's a section on emotion-focused familytherapy.org that's specifically about school support. So I think that's probably enough of me talking, and I'd love to open it up to questions, and I guess the moderators can help me perhaps by signaling which questions I should address first.
Excellent. I see some more of our board members there helping. This is Janet again in the FISA office. There's only right now one question in the chat, Dr. Miller, and that's talking about the increase in diagnosis of autism. Do you believe that it's more cases, or is it just more accurate diagnostics?
That's a really good question. I think there is some research to show that there are overall slightly more cases in the last 20 years. And then I think there is more diagnosis as well. So I think it's both. So perhaps can open it to other questions.
So feel free, we have a few minutes that you can either ask a question, or if there's something that really struck you from Dr. Miller's talk. I know that many of you on the chat are teachers, and you spoke very eloquently to the fear that is very much alive among staff members about coming back to school, and the positions that we might find ourselves taking because of our fears. So we have a question in the chat that says, do you have just one tip or strategy that would be perhaps the one to start with on June 1st? Like, what's the golden ticket for getting through June 1st?
Oh man, I think I would have to say to be kind to yourself, to wake up and just acknowledge uh, how great it is that you are doing your job, that you're there to help and support others, and that you're doing the best you can.
That is words we all needed to hear right now. Thank you. We have a question around the acronym STOP. She missed the O and the P. So she only has a, could you please repeat? Why don't, if you don't
Yeah,
mind, you could do the whole stop once again.
of course, of course. So the S is for just stop. So could be, and this is very quick, right? There could actually be a kid having some kind of meltdown in front of you, and you can say, so I'm going to just stop, right? So instead of engaging, take 3 breaths, 3 mindful breaths. And so you can do that, you know, without anyone seeing, right? And then observe. So observe your own body, right? Your own experience, you know, noticing if your heart rate is going fast, noticing you're feeling angry, noticing, you know, your fists are clenched, whatever it is, just sort of observing what's happening, or maybe it's observing the child or the parent in front of you, just kind of privately. And then P is for proceed.
So it's S. Can you just?
Yeah, S is stop. T is take 3 mindful breaths. O is observe, and P is proceed.
There you go. Thank you. We have someone asking about a child who has very low self-esteem, who doesn't seem to be very responsive when you're trying to help them. What might be your suggestion? And then the question is, do I start with validation?
Mm-hmm. So kids who have low self-esteem, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but often there's a lot of internal criticism. You can think about it as an inner critic, and maybe they've heard lots of criticism, or maybe they're just, you know, getting shunned socially, and so they've internalized it even though nobody is saying it outwardly to them. Often these kids, you know, they can't deal with more criticism. So we want to make sure that we're being as positive and noticing their strengths. So I always think of that quote, notice the donut, not the hole. So what's right with that child, and kind of noticing it. Some kids do well with praise, and they really like light up. And so you could try that. Other kids, if they feel a lot of shame, may actually not like praise and may feel worse with praise. And so if it's a kid like that, then yes, validation for sure. So again, it's not praising them, but validation would be helping like acknowledge just that it makes sense the way they're feeling that way. Because when someone outside of us validates that our feelings make sense, that actually boosts self-esteem.
It's so simple, and yet we don't do it as a matter of course. Thank you. Another question, this is saying that we're having difficulty reaching out to families who are not engaging with the online programming. We're not sure if our attempts to help, and help is in quotation marks, are actually being taken, or maybe they're feeling like pressure rather than support.
I love that question. I love that question because I think the answer is in that question. And so I'm curious how it would go to call the family or email and to say exactly that. You know, I'm not sure. I've called a couple times, and I'm not sure if this just feels like pressure because you've got so much to do right now in school, you know, may just not even feel possible. Like, I wonder how much it would open it up to just be really transparent with the family like that.
That, again, so simple, but just to have a conversation saying, I'm unsure. I mean, I don't think the school is meaning to pressure, but if it's coming across that way, they want to just say, you know,
yeah, I think it's really just being very human about it, right? Because a parent who is feeling potentially ashamed that they've not been able to get it together to get their child online may feel like anticipate a lot of judgment or criticism because they have self-judgment and criticism. So when you're calling and showing that it's really calling out of concern and curiosity and wanting to help solve, not even, starting without even solving the problem, but just like acknowledging in a very human way, it may open things up.
Beautiful. Another question. In a grade 1 class, would you recommend to start by opening a conversation about how do they feel about coming back to school or what they've been through for the last couple of months?
I think it's lovely to be open, with the kids that age. Drawing out their feelings is often a nice way to do it, or playing them out. So just to share some of their experience, and also the space for those who don't feel comfortable to share. Absolutely.
You talked about playing them out. Are there some ideas on how people could set up activities for playing out the feelings?
Yeah, so here's where I think, we're going to need everyone's creativity, because I'm not sure what the rules are going to be around infection control with toys, or if there even are toys. So I would think, maybe a small thing. I don't know if kids can have enough clay or Play-Doh, plasticine type for each kid so they can make their own, or maybe there's a couple toys that each kid can have. But playing, if it left to their own devices with toys, or even honestly sticks and stones, although our generation may not, pick that up very easily, kids will play out whatever's going on for them if you give them enough time. But usually they need like a good half hour. You need someone with them to play out what they're experiencing. So just something to keep in mind, because not all kids like to draw.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking of like pipe cleaners and anything that they can manipulate and use to tell a story in
Yeah,
whatever way they wish. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. Yeah, like ideally you have some kind of choice over your art supply or your material. But yeah, just being able to, or you can act it out, you can talk about it. I think everyone has different ways of communicating, and kids, it's usually less verbal at that younger age.
This isn't a question in the chat, it's my own question. Can teachers and other people in the school anticipate that maybe day 1 or day 2 might be a honeymoon reuniting, and then some of the more deeper feelings may start coming out after a few points of contact?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's going to be some kids who are just thrilled, like pleased as punch to see their friends, and no problem. And there might be some kids who, yeah, there is a honeymoon. That could happen for sure.
Thank you. From the chat, we have a person who would like your thoughts on this statement. The best antidote to low self-esteem is real individual opportunities for success.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So beyond, and I really appreciate whoever mentioned that, mastery. And that's actually something that's really helpful for anxiety too. So if the kids at home right now, if they can build a Lego fort, that gives a sense of accomplishment. Even better, can they make the salad for dinner? Can they mow the lawn? Accomplishing things and like real achievement is the strongest thing that helps self-esteem, even beyond anything else an external person can do or say.
So then again, I'm thinking of myself. So maybe, for example, older students that are able to write, and if people are doing a writing assignment about something such as, what is something that you did over the break that you were able to do that it surprised you or that you feel proud of, and then use some of those examples that you just said right now as prompts of starters to find those places where the child can say, rightly so, I did good on this.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not all a story of doom and gloom, right? There's countless ways that kids have been helpers, that kids have shown courage. So I think that's in equal measure, supporting their resilience is highlighting the good things they've done, the things they've liked. I don't think that's insensitive at all. I think, we're all noticing that. And also what are they grateful for? Just being able to share our gratitude and on a daily basis boosts mood, improves anxiety, everything.
And we're talking about students, but maybe for those of you who are on this call that are administrators, maybe that's a great way to do staff meeting things too. talk about those successes, no matter what they are, through this time of difficulty.
Mhm.
We don't have any more questions in the chat. We do have a few more minutes. You covered a lot, and we knew that you would be covering a lot. The slides and the handouts are available for people to review later on, as is your book. So we appreciate that those resources go away with us. But I'm curious if there's anyone else who'd like to either unmute yourself and say something out loud. Here's someone in the chat. Do you recommend COSP facilitator training? And if you do know what that is, could you please tell us what it is so other people who don't know about it can understand?
So I think they're probably referring to the Circle of Security training, which I showed one graphic
Yes,
from that.
that makes sense, yes.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. It is, so the downside of it is it's a little bit pricey. Like when you take the facilitator training, you can't then go and teach it to somebody else. So it would have to be either something you're doing for your own professional development, or your organization is supporting for a few people. But it is, of everything I've done in my training, probably one of the most helpful things I've ever done.
That is high praise, because I'm sure you've done a lot of training.
I have done a lot of things, yeah, but I really like it, really like it.
Are there other opportunities for people that, let's talk about the classroom teacher, things that they may want to be curious, not necessarily to do a full training, but just to be aware? I know you already shared a list, but anything else coming to mind?
So some of you may be aware, I think it's called the EASE program for helping kids with anxiety in the classroom. The BC government website has it on there. They've converted some of those strategies for parents. And actually the World Health Organization has a really good parenting during the pandemic section with just very simple graphics, but that cover everything from like positive parent-child relationship to behavior management to how to give kids information. So I think just having a few key resources that you can recommend to families is probably helpful. Other reasons, I mean, Anxiety Canada, I know I've mentioned several times, has a really good parenting section on it too, that you can direct parents to. So that's an excellent one. Anything else? I mean, it's nice if you're so inclined to do some sensory or mindfulness kinds of exercises with the kids. I just think no one should force themselves to do things that don't feel comfortable for them. You know, if it's part of your routine, you might want to bring it into your classroom or continue it. You can do it virtually too, or my colleagues ran their mindful awareness and resilience program through a virtual group. So that's another thing to consider, is the capacity of school counselors to run virtual groups, because actually the teenagers are totally fine. Like they find it even easier in some ways than an in-person group, support group or therapy group kind of thing. So that might be nice. Does your school want to run, or does anyone have capacity maybe to even run a virtual parent group? It's opened the doors in a lot of ways for people for whom access was difficult. Of course, not everybody has data plans or Wi-Fi that supports Zoom, but for those who do, that can be really, really nice.
Yeah, I think you're right that there's going to be offshoots of this whole experience that we're going to carry on with us and say, we don't always have to come together and have donuts and coffee on the back table. There's other ways to connect. We're almost at the end of the time, and I did see Gabe earlier. So Gabe, I'm going to call on you in a moment if you can do an official thanks. But I do also want to just, for people that maybe haven't been as connected to FISA because of your role, you may want to take some time to look at a website that FISA actually developed called wellbeingbc.ca. I've typed it into the chat. This is something that we worked on last year, and it's continuing to be enhanced this year. that talks about simple, easy to use strategies for schools, for teachers in classrooms. And it has a variety of expert videos and then a variety of action videos of, again, classrooms saying, yeah, I use this approach, I use this technique, here's what it feels like. So wellbeingbc.ca is the website. We have one more comment in the chat. It says there's a great book, if people are interested, called The Ego Boom by Steve Mack and Lillian George. Now that's one I haven't heard of, so I'm jotting down that title. We're right at 2:30. Gabe, over to you, please.
Microphone. Okay. Hello. Dr. Miller, thank you so much. Did you, first of all, direct everyone to the best way to find your book, which has just recently been published? So.
No, I did not. It is available on Amazon. And
Okay.
it was, Odin Books was going to be, I think, ordering it in. I don't know if they were able to amidst all the pandemic.
Right. Okay. Great. Well, I know that we can find it on Amazon, so thanks a lot. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. It was so great that we were able to make time for us. And I think this is one of our, it's obviously a popular topic because I think this is one of our biggest ever seminars that we've had for our group of schools. So appreciate the wisdom and the value you brought to this discussion. And I'm sure you've given everyone a lot of food for thought and topics for discussion to bring back to their colleagues and different ways that we can support our families and our students. So yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Miller.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure. It's nice to see you.
All right, we're going to wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. I'm in Vancouver and the sun is starting to break out, which always cheers me up. So I hope wherever you are safe and healthy. And as Dr. Miller reminded us, be gentle to yourself as we enter into the new phase of what education looks like for 2020.